Wade Turner grabbed Nora Vance by the apron string and yanked her backward so hard her shoulder blades slammed into the counter and 3 glasses burst across the tile. He leaned in until his face was 6 inches from hers and said it loud enough that every person inside Dunn's Mile 9 heard every syllable. "Take it off, sweetheart. You want a tip tonight, you earn it." 20 people heard him. 20 people went still. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody stood, except a man in the corner booth in green and brown camouflage and the German shepherd that was already on his feet before his handler was. Before we go any further, please subscribe to the channel and stay with Nora's story all the way to the end, because the reason nobody in that room stood up is going to matter more than anything, Wade Turner said. And drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. To understand why 20 grown adults sat frozen in their booths while a woman got slammed into a counter, you have to go back 6 days. 6 days earlier, Nora Vance had driven into Bracken County, Tennessee with $41 in her wallet, a quarter tank of gas and a duffel bag in the backseat that she kept locked even when the car was parked in an empty lot in a broad daylight. She had not chosen Bracken County. Bracken County was simply where the road ran out of the money she had left. She had passed the sign for Highway 61 at 4 in the afternoon and pulled into the gravel lot of a low-flat, unremarkable roadside diner because the window had a paper sign in it that said "Help Wanted," and because the building had 2 exits, one in front and one through the kitchen, and Nora Vance had not walked into a building with only 1 exit in 14 months. Hollis Dunn hired her in 11 minutes. He asked her if she could carry 4 plates. He asked her if she could work nights. He asked her if she had ever run a register that jammed on the 3rd try, and when she said she could learn it, he said the register was the hardest part of the job and everything else was just walking. He did not ask her where she came from. He did not ask her why a woman who spoke like she had 2 years of college behind her was asking for a waitressing job in a county where nothing came through except long-haul trucks and coal money that had dried up before she was born. He did not ask for a previous employer. He wrote her name in a spiral notebook, tore off an apron from a hook by the walk-in cooler, and told her to start Tuesday. That was the exact quality she had been looking for in an employer, and she had been looking for it in 4 states. She cried in her car for 90 seconds after she left. Then she stopped, checked her mirrors out of habit, and drove to a motel that charged $34 a night and took cash. 6 days is not a long time. 6 days is enough. By day 2, she knew that Ray Elders in booth 1 took his coffee, black, and would rather die than ask for a refill, so she refilled it without asking, and he never once said thank you, and always left $2 folded under the saucer. By day 3, she knew that the Kaminskis, the elderly couple who came every Thursday and sometimes Monday, needed the specials explained twice. Not because they were slow, but because the wife's hearing was going and the husband would rather have Nora repeat herself than admit it out loud in front of his wife. So Nora repeated herself, every time, slowly, facing them both. And by day 4, the old man had started calling her by name. By day 4, she also knew about the floorboard. There was a plank near booth 4 that squealed like a kicked animal if you put your weight on the front half of it. The other waitress, a woman named Dee, who worked the day shift and smoked in the alley between rushes, said Hollis had been meaning to fix it since the Clinton administration. Nora learned to step over it without thinking. She learned it in one afternoon, the way she learned the position of every chair leg, every corner, every blind spot behind the coffee machine where a person could stand and not be seen from the front door. She was good at the job. That was the part that surprised her. She was fast with orders and clean with trays, and she never wrote anything down for tables of 4 or fewer. She moved through the room with a particular kind of spatial awareness, the kind where she always knew exactly how many people were in the building and where each one of them was without ever appearing to look at any of them. The regulars liked her the way people like someone whose presence makes a room feel settled without understanding why. Hollis told Dee on day 5 that the new girl worked like she was being timed. Dee told him the new girl worked like she was being chased. Hollis laughed at that. Dee did not. And Nora, who had heard both of them through the pass-through window, because she always heard everything, kept wiping down the counter and said nothing at all. There were rules she followed that nobody in Bracken County knew were rules. She sat facing the door. Always. In the break room, in the motel, in the one restaurant she had eaten at, that was not the one where she worked. She parked her car nose out so it could leave in one motion instead of three. She never used the same gas station twice in a row. She did not have social media, had not had it in over a year. And when Dee tried to add her to the group chat for the staff, Nora said she had a cheap phone and the messages never came through, which was a lie so smooth and so ordinary that Dee never thought about it again. She counted the exits in every room within 4 seconds of entering it. She had timed herself once, 4 seconds. It had once taken her 90. And every single night before she turned off the motel light, she checked the parking lot from behind the curtain for a vehicle that had been there the night before. She did all of this the way other people brush their teeth. It was not fear anymore. Fear had burned off around month 3. What was left was procedure, and procedure was the only thing that had kept her breathing for 14 months. By day 6, she had almost let herself believe it. That was the dangerous part, and she knew it even while it was happening. On the afternoon of day 6, she caught herself laughing at one of Hollis Dunn's terrible jokes, a genuinely terrible joke about a chicken and a mechanic, and the laugh came out of her before she had approved it. She stood there with a rag in her hand and a strange hollow feeling in her chest, because that laugh had come from a version of herself she had buried in a storage unit in another state, along with everything else she used to own. She thought for about 4 hours that Tuesday that maybe this was a place where a person could stop. She was carrying a tray of waters toward table 3 when the front door opened at 8:47 in the evening. Nora did not look into their faces. This is the thing that nobody understands about people who have been hunted. She did not look at their faces because faces are the last useful information. She looked at the shape of them. She looked at the configuration. 5 men came through that door, and they did not come through it the way 5 men come into a diner at 8:45. 5 friends stopping for food bunch up at the entrance and argue about the booth. These men did not bunch. They dispersed. Within 11 seconds of the bell over the door going quiet, one of them had planted himself on the stool nearest the entrance without ordering anything, which meant he had a hand on the door. One of them drifted toward the back hallway with the loose board posture of a man looking for a restroom, except he stopped 2 feet short of the restroom door and stood where he could see the kitchen pass through and the rear exit at the same time. 2 more slid into the far booth on the window side back to the wall facing in. And one man walked down the middle. He walked in front. The others angled around him without being told. Nobody deferred to him out loud, which was how Nora knew the deferring had been settled a long time ago. The tray in her hands did not shake. That was training. Her jaw locked, and that was not. She set the waters at table 3. She smiled at the couple sitting there and asked if they needed anything else. She turned back toward the counter with her hands relaxed and her breathing controlled and a sound in her ears like a distant highway, and she thought very clearly and without any drama at all that this was not a group of men who had stopped for dinner. In the corner booth, a man in a Navy working uniform looked up from his coffee. His name was Elias Ward. He was 31 years old, dark brown hair, cut short, digital camouflage running green and brown under the flat overhead light. He had been sitting in that booth for 20 minutes because he needed coffee and a place to exist that required nothing from him, and Dunn's Mile 9 had appeared at the right hour on the right road. He had not ordered food. There was nothing on the table but the mug and his 2 hands resting open beside it. Still hands, but not the stillness of a man relaxing. The stillness of a man who had learned in a line of work where noise was the difference between coming home and not to hold himself completely quiet as a matter of professional habit. At his feet, half under the table, a German shepherd lay with his head up. Kodiak, amber eyes moving across the room in slow, methodical sweeps that never fully stopped cataloging without urgency, the way a working dog does when he has been on enough floors to know that most rooms are nothing. Elias watched the 5 men come in, and he felt the first 30 seconds of it land in his chest like something recognized. Spread pattern on entry, perimeter before threat, one man running the room while the others held the corners and the doors. He had seen that exact configuration in 4 countries on 3 continents, and it had never once meant anything good. It meant the men doing it had done it before together and had a reason for the geometry that had nothing to do with the menu. Heimat himself stay seated. That was the harder skill and the one that took the longest to learn. Standing up too early, closes options that patience keeps open. So he wrapped his hands back around the mug, and he watched, and under the table, Kodiak's head turned 2 degrees to the left, and the dog's sweep stopped being lazy. Wade Turner did not raise his voice when he called Nora over. He did not need to. That was the tell. His voice carried the whole length of the room at a conversational volume because he had never once in his life needed volume to get a room's attention in Bracken County, and everyone in that room heard it, and nobody was surprised by it, and Nora understood in that half second exactly what kind of man she was walking toward. He called her Rookie. He told her to come take their order. She came with her notepad. She looked at him directly, not with challenge, but with the flat steadiness of a person who had learned that giving a man like this anything to react to was the fastest way to escalate a situation that did not need escalating. I took his time. He let her stand there. He asked if she had a name. She gave him one. He repeated it slowly, turning the word over in his mouth like he was checking it for value, and then he looked at the man beside him and said something about how that was a fancy name for a girl working the late shift in a place like this, and the table made the sound that men make when the man they follow says something they are required to find funny. Nora wrote down 5 drinks and turned to go. The man on Turner's right slid his knee out into her path. Not far, just enough that she would have had to brush his leg to pass. She did not look down and she did not break stride. She shifted her weight to her left foot and stepped around it in one clean motion tray, tucked shoulder turned, gone. It took less than a second, and it was so smooth that half the men at the table did not register that anything had happened. The one with the knee registered it. He said something after her about watching herself, sweetheart. She did not answer. In the corner booth, Elias Ward set down his coffee and did not pick it back up. She brought the drinks. She distributed them with the smallest footprint a human being can manage while carrying a tray in and out, no wasted motion. And Turner watched every step of it with the specific attention of a man cataloging something for later use. He asked if she was always this quiet. She said she was working. He said that did not mean she could not be friendly. She said she was friendly during the order, and after that she was efficient, and she tucked the empty tray under her arm and said it without heat, without sarcasm, without one single thread a man could grab and pull. One of the men at the table made a low noise. Ooh. The table laughed, and the laugh was different this time. Sharper, shorter. It was the sound of 4 men watching the man they follow get handled by a waitress and waiting to see what he was going to do about it in front of them. Wade Turner stopped smiling for about 1 second. Then the smile came back. But it had changed into something with less warmth in it and more decision, and every person in the building who had grown up in Bracken County recognized that particular change on that particular face, and 3 of them quietly stopped eating. Nora turned to go. His voice hit her from behind harder than before. Not louder, harder. He told her he was still talking to her. She turned around and asked evenly if he needed something else from the menu. He told her he needed her to lose the attitude. She said she did not have an attitude, she had 4 other tables. And that was the moment the night stopped being recoverable because Wade Turner stood up. He did not stand up fast. That was the whole point of it. He rose slowly out of that booth, unfolding himself the way a man does when he wants a room to watch him make a choice, and he stepped around the end of the table and cut her off before she could reach the counter. He planted himself in her path with the body language of a man who had done this exact thing in this exact county many times and knew precisely what it communicated to everybody watching. Then he explained something to her low and close at a volume meant only for her and for the 2 nearest booths who would carry it to everyone else. He told her he had been coming into this county for years. He told her he knew Hollis Dunn. He told her he knew every single person sitting in that room by name. And then he paused because the pause was the part that mattered, and he told her that nobody in the building was going to say one word about how he talked to Hollis Dunn's waitresses. Nora looked at him for a moment. She had done the arithmetic before he finished the sentence. 20 people, 4 exits, 2 of them behind him. A truck driver in booth 2 who was outweighing every man in the room and was going to do nothing. An old couple who were going to look at their plates. A boss with a mortgage. She was not afraid. That was the strange part, the part she would think about later. She was tired in a way that went down through the floor. She asked him quietly and politely to step aside. He laughed. He turned back toward his men like she had performed a trick. She said it again, step aside. He turned back around and his voice dropped into something uglier, and he laid it out for her. She was going to smile. She was going to be friendly, and she was going to earn her tips the right way. She told him she earned them by doing her job correctly, which was what she was doing, and she asked him one more time to move. Yeah. Something changed behind Wade Turner's eyes. Nora saw it happen, and she braced her back, foot a half inch, and that half inch was the only thing in the entire room that moved. His hand shot out and caught the apron string at her hip, and he yanked her toward him, hard enough that her shoulder blades hit the counter edge, and three glasses stacked on the lip went off the side and detonated on the tile. The Kaminskis both flinched. The truck driver in booth 2 went absolutely still with his fork halfway up. Somebody's coffee cup rattled down onto a saucer, and Wade Turner said it loud deliberately to the whole room with his hand still wrapped in her apron string. "Take it off. You want a tip tonight, sweetheart. You earn it." Two of his men had their phones up. One of them was laughing. One of them was saying things underneath the laughing that do not need to be repeated. Nora Vance did not scream. She stood pinned against that counter with her shoulder jammed into the edge and her eyes locked on his face and her expression doing something that not one person in that room could read, except one man in a corner booth who had seen that exact expression before on other faces in other countries and had warned himself in situations where the wrong reaction was the last reaction a person ever got to make. She was not panicking. She was running a calculation. She told him not to. It was not a plea and it was not fear. It was a warning delivered flat, and the two men closest to her heard it and did not understand what they were hearing. Wade Turner leaned in closer and asked her or what. And that was when Hollis Dunn's face appeared in the kitchen, pass-through window. 58 years old, a dish towel over his shoulder. He saw a man with his fist in his employee's apron and glass all over his floor, and his hand came up to the frame of the window and gripped it hard enough that the knuckles went white. And then Hollis Dunn did nothing at all. Because Hollis Dunn had a mortgage on the building and 3 employees who needed hours, and because he had been writing a check every single month for 14 months to a third party under a line item in his books that he called catering expenses, and because he knew exactly to the inch how far Wade Turner's reach extended in Bracken County. The old woman in booth 6 made a small sound and turned her face away. Nobody stood up. 20 people, and not one of them stood up. Then in the corner booth, a chair leg moved on the tile, and a German shepherd rose to his feet without being asked. And a sound came out of that dog's chest that went down through the floor and up into the bones of everyone sitting in that room. The growl did not sound like a threat, it sounded like a decision. Elias Ward came up out of that booth, slow and level, the way a man stands when he has already run the room and settled on what happens next, and only needs his body to catch up to it. Kodiak rose in the same motion, shoulder at his handler's knee, ears forward, amber eyes locking onto Wade Turner's hands. Not his face, his hands. Because the dog had been trained to track hands, and he was tracking them now, with the total uninterested focus of an animal that had already reached a conclusion and was simply waiting for permission. Turner turned his head. He was not afraid. He was annoyed the way a man gets annoyed when somebody interrupts him mid-sentence. Elias stopped 4 feet short and told him to let her go. 3 words flat, no volume behind them at all. And what unsettled Wade Turner about those 3 words, though he would not have been able to explain it to anyone, was that they were not a challenge. There was no heat in them, no performance, nothing for him to push against. It was the tone a man uses to tell somebody their headlights are on. Turner looked him over. The uniform, the camouflage, the dog. Then he looked back at his men and let his face perform amusement for their benefit, and he asked whether the tough guy was going to sick his dog on him. Elias said he was not going to do anything. He said he was going to stand exactly where he was standing, and Turner was going to let go of the apron, and then Turner was going to sit back down. There was a beat of about 2 seconds where the whole room heard a man being told what to do inside a county where nobody had told him what to do in years. Then Turner opened his fingers. The apron string slipped free, but he did not step back. He turned his whole body toward Elias, squaring up, and every person in Dunn's Mile 9 understood that they had just watched a man move from one target to a more interesting one. He told Elias to mind his own business. Elias said this was his business. Turner wanted to know how some waitress he had never met became his business, and Elias told him without raising his voice 1 degree that she had said don't, and he had not stopped. That was the sentence that changed the temperature, because it did not sound like heroics, it sounded like arithmetic. And men like Wade Turner are not equipped for arithmetic. They are equipped for pride, and pride requires an opponent who is also operating on pride. Behind Elias, something shifted. He did not turn his head. His peripheral vision caught it a half second before his brain confirmed it, and the confirmation was worse than the movement. The man who had been loitering near the back hallway was no longer near the back hallway. He was standing between Elias and the front door. The man who had been in the far booth was on his feet with his hands loose at his sides. The geometry of the room had reorganized itself in under 30 seconds, and it had reorganized around Elias, and it had done so without a single word being spoken between any of them. Which meant they had done this before, together enough times that they no longer needed to talk about it. That was not a bar fight forming, that was a formation. Kodiak felt it through his handler's body before his handler said anything. The growl dropped a full register down into something that sat under the floorboards, and the dog shifted his weight forward onto his front legs by maybe 2 inches. The pre-movement adjustment of an animal that had been in enough operational rooms to know when one was about to come apart and wanted to be standing in the right place when it did. Turner asked if Elias really wanted to do this over a girl he did not even know, and Elias said he did not need to know her. He also said something else, and this was the part that Nora Vance would remember for a very long time afterward, because it was the first time in 14 months that anybody had described out loud the thing she had been feeling in her spine since 8:47. He told Turner he had been watching the way the 5 of them came through that door. He told him he had been watching for 40 minutes. He said the man near the hallway had not been watching the room and had not been watching Hollis and had not been watching him. He said that man had been watching her, specifically her, since the second the door opened. He said that is not how a person behaves in a diner he wandered into. He said they had come here for something and it was not food. Wade Turner's smile did not go away, but something behind it stopped moving. Elias cataloged that stillness, the way he cataloged everything quietly, permanently, and filed it in the drawer where he kept information that was going to matter later. And Nora, still pressed against the counter with broken glass around her shoes, looked at Turner's face and understood with a cold clarity that went all the way down that the thing she had been dreading since she clocked in at 4 o'clock had walked through the front door of her workplace at 8:45, and that a stranger in the corner booth had seen it before she had finished admitting it to herself. Elias told him to get out, now. 3 full seconds of nothing. Hollis done in the kitchen doorway, with a dish towel still on his shoulder. The Kaminskis pressed back into the vinyl of booth 6. The truck driver in booth 2 who had not blinked in a minute. And underneath all of it, the dig low and continuous and absolutely patient, the only sound in the building. Then Turner looked at his man near the hallway. Just a look. It carried something Elias could not translate into words, but he memorized the shape of it anyway. And Wade Turner stepped back. He smoothed the front of his jacket with both hands, which was a small and almost embarrassing gesture. And he said, "All right, soldier boy," twice quietly, and it was not surrender. Elias had seen surrender. This was reassessment. This was a man revising a plan, not abandoning one. He jerked his head at his crew and they moved. The man from the hallway went last. And as he passed Nora, he turned his head and looked at her one more time. And it was not the look men give women in diners. It was flatter than that and far worse. It was the focused, unhurried attention of somebody folding up a piece of work he fully intended to come back and finish. Elias memorized the face. He memorized the neck and the tattoo running up out of the collar in lines that were only half visible. The door swung shut. The bell over it rang like nothing had happened, and the whole building exhaled at once. Hollis Dunn came out of the kitchen, fast-talking, before he cleared the doorway, apologizing and swearing and asking if she was cut, and Nora was saying she was fine. She was fine in the automatic voice of a person who has said she was fine so many times it no longer requires her participation. But Elias was not listening to any of it, because the dog had done something he had never seen the dog do. Kodiak walked away from him. He crossed the tile without a command past the broken glass and pressed his side against Nora Vance's leg and lifted his head and looked up at her with those amber eyes. And Nora, without thinking, without hesitating, put her hand flat on the dog's back and said one word. Easy. The growl stopped instantly, not gradually, instantly, like a switch. Elias Ward stood in the middle of that diner and felt the floor tilt about 4 degrees. Because that word was not a word. That word was a protocol. It came out of a joint program between Naval Investigative Services and Federal Witness Protection. It had run for roughly 18 months before somebody shut it down, and its entire operational value depended on the fact that almost nobody on the planet knew it. It was not in any public training manual. It was not in any private one either. He had used it in 3 countries and had never once heard it come out of a mouth that did not belong to somebody with a clearance. And a rookie waitress in Bracken County, Tennessee had just used it to bring a working military dog down off high alert while standing in her own broken glass. She knew what she had done the second she did it. He watched her realize it. He watched her hand keep moving on the dog's back, while everything behind her eyes started running twice as fast. And when she finally looked up and met his stare, what he saw on her face was not fear and was not embarrassment. It was a woman calculating in real time how much she had just given away, and whether the man she had given it to was about to become a bigger problem than the 5 who just walked out. He did not look away. He asked her quietly where she had learned that word. She held his eyes for a long moment. Then she told him she needed to close out her tables. He said he would wait. She looked at him for one more second, picked up her notepad, and went back to work with glass still crunching under her shoes. Hollis locked the front door behind the last regular at 11:15 and stood there with his hand on the deadbolt like he was deciding something, and then he turned around and told Nora she was going to have to tell him what was going on. She said she was fine. He said he had not asked how she was. He said he had asked what was going on, and his voice was not unkind, but there was nothing soft left in it either because Hollis Dunn had known Wade Turner for 15 years, and Wade Turner did not walk into his diner and make a scene over a waitress. That was not how the man operated. He came in for something, and Hollis said he needed to not be surprised when he found out what it was. Nora kept wiping the counter. Then she stopped, set the rag down, and looked at him with the expression of somebody who had rehearsed a version of this conversation 100 times in 100 motel rooms and was discovering that the rehearsed version was useless. Elias was still at the counter. He had not left. He had not offered to. He had ordered a third coffee and sat with it, and there was a quality to his waiting that made it clear it could continue all night if it needed to. He told her that if she wanted him gone, he would go. But he said he had heard a federal protocol word come out of her mouth 40 minutes ago, and he was having a real hard time walking out of here without understanding it. She said she could just know some things and he could move on. He asked again, and she said outside. They stood behind the building with the cold coming up off the gravel and Kodiak sitting between them like he had appointed himself the referee of whatever this was going to be, and Nora Vance told a stranger the truth for the first time in 14 months. 6 weeks ago, a federal marshal had called her and told her that her protection arrangement was under review due to restructuring. Funding issues, he said. Budget cycle, he said. They gave her 72 hours notice. Before that, she had been in a formal relocation program for 14 months. She had testified against a man named Emmett Rourke, who ran a trafficking operation moving through 4 states. The trial had been continued 8 separate times in 11 months. Every time a date got set, his attorneys filed something else, and the whole thing slid backward another quarter. And 2 weeks before her protection was pulled, she had found out that 2 other witnesses in the same case had their arrangements discontinued as well. Both of them inside of 30 days. Elias asked where those 2 women were now. She looked at him, and the answer was on her face before she said it out loud. Nobody knows. He stood there in the cold and did the math the way he did it in the field sequentially without letting hope contaminate any step of it. Then he asked how she knew the protocol word. She said they had put her through a 6-week self-defense and crisis response course. When she entered the program, and one of the trainers had a dog, and he taught her the commands. She said the man had told her she might need them someday. He asked if she had told anyone that she was coming to Bracken County. She said no. He asked about cards attached to her real name. No. Contact with anyone from before. Nothing. Not a phone call, not a letter, not a birthday. Then he told her the thing he had already decided, which was that the man from the hallway had not been watching the room. He had been watching her from the moment they came in. She said she knew. She said she had noticed. Then she hesitated for exactly 1 beat, reached into her apron pocket, pulled out her phone and handed it to him. It was a photograph blurry taken at an angle of a man standing outside what looked like a motel. The date stamp put it 2 months back. There was a tattoo on his neck, and even in that bad image, the pattern of it was unmistakable. She said she had taken it outside the motel she was staying at 6 weeks earlier before she moved here. She said she saw him twice in 3 days and did not know who he was, but she kept the picture because that is what they trained her to do. Then she said the man in the hallway tonight had the same tattoo. Elias looked at that photograph for a long time. Then he looked at her and said he followed you here. And Nora said no. Or he found me here. And she said those are two different things. She said following means somebody tracked her movement. Finding means somebody told him where she was. That distinction landed in Elias Ward's chest with the specific weight of information that changes a problem's entire category. He asked if she thought the leak was inside the program. She said she thought 3 witnesses from the same case had their protection pulled in the same month, and 2 of them were gone, and she was the third, and she did not believe in that kind of coincidence. He took out his phone and dialed from memory, a number he did not keep stored under any name that would mean anything to anyone who ever went through his contacts. It rang twice. He told the man who answered that he needed a file pulled. Emmett Rourke. Everything. There was a pause. The man said that was a federal case. Elias said he knew it was a federal case. The pause that came next was longer, and when the voice came back, it had dropped and flattened. It said that name carried flags on it that he was not supposed to discuss on an open line. Then it asked where he was. Elias told him. Bracken County, Tennessee. The voice asked if he was involved in something, and Elias said he was standing in a diner parking lot with a witness who had been located by somebody who should not have known where she was, and he asked what he could be told. The silence on that line ran 3 seconds too long. Then Boone said carefully, "Be careful." He said that was all he could give right now. He said, "Be very careful." And the line went dead. Nora had not heard a word of the call. She read his face instead. She said his contact just told him to be careful and hung up. She said that means he knows something and cannot say it on an open line, which means this is bigger than one man with a tattoo in a diner. Elias said yes. She asked how much bigger, and he told her the truth, which was that he did not know yet. Then he looked at her directly and told her she could not go home tonight. And Nora Vance looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had known that since 8:47. They went back inside, and Hollis was at the counter with a cup of coffee. He was not drinking. And when Elias came through the door, Hollis said, "Tell me what I need to know." So Elias told him enough, not all of it. The parts that let a man understand the shape of what was sitting on top of his building, without the parts that would take longer than the night had room for. And he watched Hollis Dunn's face while he listened, and what moved across it was the particular expression of a man absorbing something bigger than he expected and smaller than he feared. When it was done, Hollis said Turner was connected to this. He said it flatly, not as a question. He said Turner's crew provided local access, and the man with the tattoo was not from around here. Elias asked how he knew. And Hollis Dunn told him something he had never told another living soul, which was that Wade Turner had been using Bracken County as a pass-through for 3 years, and that Hollis had been paying a protection arrangement to a third party for 14 months ever since 2 businesses down the road had their windows put out for filing complaints. He said he wrote it in his books as a catering account. He said it in the voice of a man who was not angry so much as exhausted, the exhaustion of somebody who has been quietly paying the price of something he never once agreed to. Elias asked who collected it. Hollis gave him a name. Elias did not recognize it, but he wrote it on a napkin and folded the napkin into his pocket because he was beginning to see the shape of the thing. Now, the web of local access and local silence that an operation like Emmett Rourke's needed in every single county it moved through. Nora had been listening from the far end of the counter. She said, "Hollis, I'm sorry." She said she did not know when she took this job that she was bringing this here. Hollis looked at her for a long moment. He told her she did not bring it. He told her it was already here. He said she just made it visible. Then he picked up the coffee he had not been drinking and said that was the first useful thing to happen in this county in a long time. At 2:47 in the morning, Elias Ward's phone lit up with a number he did not recognize, and he answered it before the second ring finished. The voice was male and fast and low, and it did not identify itself. It told him not to use his name. It told him not to say where he was. It asked if she was with him. He said yes. It told him both of them needed to stay in odd until 6. It told him not to go near their vehicles before 6 because the parking lot was being watched. Then it told him that the man with the neck tattoo had made a phone call at 11:50 that night and that they had intercepted it. It said he reported a location confirmation and requested asset deployment for early morning. Elias asked how many. Two, the voice said. Possibly three. Locally sourced, which meant Turner's crew had supplied them, which meant they were not professionals, but they knew every road in the county. Then the voice said the thing that reorganized the entire night. It said the internal leak was not a field agent. It said the leak was administrative, case coordinator level, and it said that person had been on Emmett Rourke's payroll for 22 months. Elias asked how long they had known. The voice said 3 days, and Elias very quietly asked about the other two witnesses. The pause that followed ran 3 seconds too long, and by then Elias Ward had learned exactly what 3 seconds meant. The voice said that was why they moved fast when they identified that he had made contact with her. It said the first two had been found before the leak was isolated. It said they could not move on the coordinator without alerting Rourke's legal team. Then it said this was not a conversation it could continue on this line, and that the address it had sent earlier was burned and a new one would come in 60 seconds. The line went dead. The text arrived 45 seconds later. A gas station 2 towns over, a specific pump number, 615. Elias looked up. Nora was watching him from the counter with the same stillness she had been wearing since 11 o'clock, the stillness of a woman who had been running calculations without stopping for 6 straight hours. He said they had to move before 6 because the lot was being watched and he needed another way out. And Hollis Dunn said from the kitchen doorway that his truck was parked in the alley keys on the hook by the coffee machine, and that it had not been registered in his name for 4 years because it was still sitting in his brother-in-law's estate. He said whoever was watching their vehicles was not looking for that truck. Elias asked if he had heard all of that. Hollis said he had heard enough. Then he asked what early morning meant in terms of a timeline. Elias said it meant before 6. Hollis looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3:20. He said, then you have got 2 hours. Elias took the keys. He told Nora they would leave at 5:15, take the alley to the service road that ran behind the grain elevator, and stay off the main road for the first mile. He asked if she could navigate from memory. She said she had driven every road in this county twice since she got here. She said it was an old habit. Then she picked up her jacket and asked about Hollis. And Elias asked Hollis whether there was anybody in this county he trusted completely. Hollis Dunn thought about it for exactly 2 seconds and said Deputy Cass Whitlow. He said she had been trying to document Wade Turner for 6 months, and every complaint she filed went across the desk of a supervisor who had gone to high school with Turner's older brother. He said she had her own file, her own evidence. She just had no clean channel to run it through. Elias told him to call her right now. Tell her everything. Tell her there would be men in or near this building before 6, and that he needed her physically standing in it before that happened. Hollis was already picking up the phone. Kodiak was already on his feet. They were in that truck at 5:12, rolling through the alley with the headlights off for the first 30 seconds, while Nora called turns from memory with the quiet precision of somebody who had spent 6 weeks preparing for exactly this kind of movement, and 14 months hoping she would never use it. They were 4 blocks out when Elias Ward's phone lit up with a text from the number that was not saved. It said they moved early. Check on Hollis. He called the diner. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Same thing. And Nora Vance said, turn around. Her voice was flat and it was certain, and it did not leave any room in it for discussion. She said Hollis is alone in that building. Elias turned around. The man waiting at Pump 4 at 6:19 that morning was named Boone, and he drank gas station coffee without complaining about it, which Elias had always considered the single most reliable indicator of a certain kind of career. He was leaning against the sedan when Hollis Dunn's truck pulled in, and when Cass Whitlow's cruiser came off the highway 30 seconds behind it, his eyes went straight to Elias with a question in them that did not need words. Elias shook his head once. That was the whole exchange. Cass Whitlow was not the problem. She was part of the solution, and Elias had decided that somewhere between a wrecked kitchen and a county road, and he had not second-guessed it once since. Boone looked at Nora Vance for a long moment before he said anything at all. Something moved across his face that was not quite recognition and not quite relief, and sat somewhere painful between the two. He said, you trained with Duval. Nora went still. She had not said that name to anybody in 14 months, except one man in a parking lot at midnight. She said yes. And Boone said Ray Duval requested her placement personally. He said Duvall filed the paperwork 3 separate times before it was approved. Nora asked what that meant, and Boone told her something that took the last 14 months of her life and turned it around so she was looking at the other side of it. He said Duvall had known her protection was going to fail. Not suspected, known. He had known it 8 months before it happened, and because he had found the first anomaly in the case coordinator's access logs while running a routine audit. Nobody had asked him to run, and he could not prove it. And every time he tried to escalate it, he was told he was reading noise. So he stopped escalating, and he started building. Boone said the 6-week course Nora went through was not standard. He said Duvall wrote it. He said the self-defense component was real, and the crisis response component was real, and buried inside it were 4 things that had no business being in a witness training curriculum at all. One of them was a dog protocol out of a discontinued joint program between Naval Investigative Services and Federal Witness Protection. Boone said the whole value of that word was that almost nobody alive knew it. He said Duvall put it in her mouth on purpose. He said Duvall did not want her stumbled over by some deputy running her plates. He said Duvall wanted her found by somebody with the right training in a way that could not be faked and could not be explained away. And he said the man had built a lock and handed her the only key in existence and told her she might need it someday. Nora stood there in a gas station parking lot at 20 past 6 in the morning and heard for the first time that the sentence she had carried around as a throwaway line from a kind instructor had been the most deliberate thing anyone had ever done for her. She said quietly that he had told her she might need it someday. She said she thought he was just being thorough. Boone said Ray Duvall had never been thorough in his life. He said Duvall was precise, which was a different animal entirely. Elias asked what happened to him, and Boone looked at his coffee cup for a second before he answered. Ace said Duvall was removed from the program 7 months ago. Administrative review. The case coordinator flagged his access pattern as anomalous, which was, Boone said flatly, one of the more impressive pieces of work he had seen in 20 years, because the person selling witness locations to Emmett Rourke had reported the one man in the building who noticed, and the review board had accepted it. He said Duvall had been working a desk in a regional office in Virginia ever since. He said the man could not contact a witness. He could not access a case file. He could not do one single official thing. Then Boone said, and he said it was something in his voice that was almost admiration and almost grief, that Duvall had been doing everything unofficial. Elias said he was the one who intercepted the call last night. Boone said yes. He said Duvall had people who owed him from 20 years of work, people outside every official channel, and that when the intercept came through with a location confirmation on Nora Vance, there had been no clean way to move it through the federal system because the coordinator was still sitting at her desk with full access until 40 hours ago. Then he reached into his jacket and took out a sealed envelope. He said 40 hours ago, the Inspector General's office at the Department of Justice received a package. Financial records, communication logs, access timestamps matched line by line against witness location disclosures. 20 months of payments from Emmett Rourke's people into a limited liability company that traced back to the coordinator in 4 steps. Elias asked who sent it, and Boone said Duvall sent it the day they cleared his desk. He said the man dated it for delayed delivery. He said he timed it to land only after he had exhausted every single internal option he had because he wanted the record to show that he tried the proper way first, and because he knew that the second that package moved, whoever was watching would start moving too. Boone handed the envelope over. He said it was backup documentation. Chain of evidence establishing the coordinator's access to all 3 witness files before their protection was discontinued. Then his voice went flat in a way that everybody standing there understood. He said the first 2 witnesses he needed her to hear it from him directly had already been located by the time the Inspector General's office confirmed the source. He said they did not know in time. He said there was no version of the timeline where they got there first, and he was not going to stand in a parking lot and pretend otherwise. Nora looked at the ground for a while. She did not fall apart. Elias watched her not fall apart, and it was worse than watching her fall apart would have been, because she had clearly done this before, absorbed a number that would not go back down. And she had a place inside herself where she put things like that. And the fact that the place existed at all told you everything about the last 14 months. She asked their names. Boone hesitated. She said she had never known them. She said they had been in the same case, in the same program, and she had never once been told who they were, and she said she was not going to leave that parking lot without their names. Boone told her. She repeated both of them out loud once, and then she nodded, and that was the entire ceremony. Those two women got at 6:31 in the morning at a gas station in Tennessee, and it was more than the system that failed them had managed. Cass Whitlow had been standing back near her cruiser, giving the conversation the room it needed. Now she stepped up and asked what she was supposed to do with three men sitting in her holding cell on county charges. Boone said hold them on the overnight assault. He said by 9 o'clock there would be a federal detainer on all three. Then he said the man with the neck tattoo was named Silas Krebs, that he had active warrants in 2 states, and that the open federal file on him had just gotten significantly more crowded. He asked Whitlow for her 6 months of documentation on Wade Turner. She had the flash drive out of her pocket before he finished the sentence. She said she had been carrying it for 3 months waiting for somebody to take it. Boone turned it over in his fingers and asked how long she had been in that department. 12 years, she said. He asked about the supervisor. She said high school, 30 years, Turner's older brother, and she said she could document 4 separate instances in the past 18 months where complaints filed through her unit arrived on his desk with material facts missing that were present in her original submission. Then she said the thing that mattered most, which was that at 3:45 that morning, that same supervisor's line had rerouted her to a domestic disturbance call at an address where no call had ever been placed. Boone stopped turning the drive over. He asked her to say that again. She said it again, and Boone said quietly that a county supervisor obstructing complaints was a state problem, but a county supervisor pulling the only responding deputy off a location 11 minutes before an abduction attempt was a federal one, and that her 12 years of nothing had just become the cleanest piece of corroboration in the entire file. He said her supervisor was going to have a very difficult week. And Cass Whitlow said good, and she said it the way a person says something they have been holding in their mouth for 12 years. Then Elias's phone rang, and it was Hollis Dunn. Hollis said there was a man sitting in a truck on the far side of his lot. Not one of the 3 from last night, different truck. He said the man had been sitting there for 40 minutes without getting out. Elias looked at Boone and said one word, Turner. Boone was already dialing. He made 2 calls inside 90 seconds, both of them short, and by the end of the second one, whatever had been gray in his face had hardened into something specific. He said Wade Turner had been trying to reach Silas Krebs since midnight. He said Turner did not know his crew had been taken because nobody had come out of that diner to tell him, and the county had gone quiet on him. He said Turner was sitting on that parking lot waiting for a check-in that was never going to come. Then he said if they moved now before he worked out that the crew was in custody, the man would not have time to build a story. Cass Whitlow already had her radio up. She said she wanted to be the one who put the cuffs on him. Elias said she had earned it. They were back at Dunn's Mile 9 in 11 minutes, and Wade Turner was still sitting in that truck in the far corner of the lot, which was the first piece of uncomplicated good news the morning had produced. Whitlow came in from the south. Elias came off the service road. Turner saw the cruiser and started his engine, and there was a second where it could have gone another way entirely. Then he saw Hollis Dunn's truck sitting across the alley exit. The engine ran for 4 more seconds. Then it shut off. He got out with his hands visible, and not because he was cooperative. He got out with his hands visible because he was a man who had been through enough legal situations in his life to know exactly where the line sat between manageable and unmanageable, and he had every intention of staying on the manageable side of it. Cass Whitlow put him against the side of his own truck and cuffed him and read him his rights in the deliberate, unhurried voice of somebody who had been waiting 6 months to say those exact sentences and fully intended to get every word of them correct. Turner did not fight it. He looked past her shoulder instead at Elias standing there with the dog beside him. He said, "You are not even a cop." Elias said, "No." He said, "You have got no jurisdiction here." Elias said, "Also correct." And Turner, the cuffs on with his own truck under his shoulder and his own county going out from under him, asked him what he was then. And Elias Ward looked at him and said, "I am the guy who stopped for coffee." Turner stared at him for a second and did not have anything to put after that. Then Nora Vance walked over. Whitlow put a hand up, and Nora stopped exactly where she needed to stop, close enough to be heard, and no closer. And she looked at the man who had put her into a counter 12 hours earlier. She said, "Last night you told me nobody in that building was going to say a word about how you talked to me." She said, "You were right." She said, so this morning I am going to say it to a federal grand jury instead. Wade Turner did not answer her. He looked at the ground and then he looked at his own boots, and something in his face came apart in a small and private way that nobody standing in that lot enjoyed watching, because it was the exact moment a man understood that the county he had been renting for 3 years had just been repossessed. They put him in the back of the second cruiser and the moment closed. Boone came up beside Elias with his phone still in his hand. He said the coordinator had been arrested in Arlington at 6:52 that morning. He said Emmett Rourke's legal team would start receiving discovery within the hour that they very much did not want, and that the continuance motions were going to stop because a defense strategy built on delay does not survive the arrest of the person who had been feeding it. Nora asked about the trial. Boone said it would get a new date, 90 days, maybe less, if the prosecutor's office moved the way they were signaling. Then he told her she would have to testify again with full federal protection, this time properly structured, with oversight running well above coordinator level. And then he said Duvall has been cleared to come back to the program. He requested her case specifically. He requested it before he was even reinstated. Nora closed her eyes for about 2 seconds. When she opened them, they were steady. She said she wanted to talk to him. Boone said he had been expecting her call for 6 weeks. And then Nora Vance said the thing that nobody in that parking lot saw coming. She said she had to go open the diner. Elias asked her to repeat that. She said Hollis had a morning rush at 7:30, and the coffee machine had to be running by 7, or it would not be ready, and the Kaminskis came in on Thursdays and it was Thursday. She said it with complete seriousness, and Elias understood in that moment that this was not avoidance and it was not shock. It was evidence. It was a woman putting a fact on the record with her own two hands, and the fact was that the thing which had been trying to stop her for 14 months had come into her workplace and had put a hood in a jacket pocket for her and had not stopped her. Hollis Dunn had been standing close enough to hear all of it. He did not say anything. He just reached into his pocket and held out his keys. Nora took them. At 8:40, with the diner half full and the regulars working through the first pot, Boone called Elias one more time. He said the coordinator had been arraigned. He said the inspector general's office was moving fast because the case was clean, because Duvall had built the documentation to survive every challenge before he ever mailed it. Then he said there was one more thing, and his voice changed. He said Ray Duvall was in Bracken County. He said the man had driven up the night before the moment the intercept came through, and that he had been sitting in a car 2 blocks off the highway since 4 in the morning because he could not come anywhere near that building while the situation was still active without compromising every piece of it. Boone said he would like to see her. Elias looked across the counter. Nora was at booth 6 with her notepad explaining the specials twice, facing them both unhurried the way she had been doing since day 3. The old man said something and she laughed, and it was a real laugh, and it came out of her before she had approved it. Elias said, send him in. Ray Duvall was 53 years old, and he came through the front door of that diner with the careful, slightly stiff movement of a man who had spent 4 months sitting at a desk that was not built for him and was still recalibrating to motion. He stopped just inside and did not say anything. Nora turned around from booth 6 with the notepad still in her hand, and she did not move for 3 full seconds. She stood there in her apron, with her hair pulled back and her order pad against her hip, and every regular in that building, suddenly aware that something was happening that had nothing to do with breakfast, and what was on her face in those 3 seconds was not relief and was not surprise. It was the look of a person seeing in the flesh, standing in a doorway in Tennessee, the proof that she had never once been forgotten. Then she crossed that floor. Duvall opened his arms, and Nora Vance walked into them and held on the way. People hold on when they are finally setting down something they have been carrying alone for 426 days. Hollis Dunn appeared in the pass-through windows, looked at it for about 1 second, and disappeared back into his kitchen with the discretion of a man who understands exactly when a moment needs to be made smaller. Kodiak watched from under the counter with his tail moving slow. They sat in the corner booth for 40 minutes. Elias did not go near it. He drank his coffee and listened to Hollis explain to each arriving regular that there had been a little excitement last night, but everything was fine now, which was both entirely true and the single largest understatement in the history of Bracken County. When Nora finally came back to the counter, her eyes were red and her face was settled. She said Duvall built all of it in 8 days. 8 days between finding the anomaly in the access logs and the morning they cleared his desk. The protocol word, the embedded signals, the sealed file, the delayed package to the Inspector General, 8 days. She said he told her he could not save her protection. She said he told her he could make sure somebody would find her if she ever needed to be found. She looked down at her hands for a second and said she had spent 14 months believing nobody was looking. And Elias Ward, who had stopped for a cup of coffee he did not need on a highway he had no reason to be on, told her the truth, which was that somebody had been looking the entire time. The trial date came back 6 weeks later, and Emmett Rourke's attorneys filed one more continuance motion the same afternoon it landed. It was the ninth one. It read like the other 8, and it died in under 72 hours because by then the judge had in front of him a federal filing establishing that the 8 motions before it had been coordinated with a woman who was at that moment sitting in a federal holding facility in Virginia trying to work out what she could trade. The judge denied it on the grounds of bad faith filing. Nora Vance found out about it standing behind the counter at Dunn's Mile 9 with a coffee pot in her hand, and she read the message twice, and then she put the phone in her apron pocket and finished the pour because table 4 had been waiting. Hollis Dunn asked her what it was. She said the trial was going forward. He asked when. She said 31 days, and then she went and refilled Ray Elder's cup without being asked, and Ray Elders left $2 folded under the saucer and did not say thank you. And the morning went on exactly the way mornings had been going on in that building since 1974. The coordinator's name was Marlene Pryor, and she had worked in witness services for 19 years. That was the part that nobody in the Inspector General's office could get comfortable with. Not the money, the tenure, 19 years of access, 19 years of case files crossing a desk. And when the investigators walked the timeline backward, what they found was that the payments had started 22 months earlier, which meant that for 17 years and change she had done the job correctly, and then one day she had not. She pulled guilty to 3 of 5 counts and agreed to cooperate against Emmett Rourke in exchange for a sentencing recommendation. Her cooperation took 8 months of tactical obstruction apart in 11 days. She gave them the payment routing. She gave them the shell company. She gave them the 2 conversations where Rourke's people had asked for the third witness by file number. And she had provided a state and a general region, and she gave them the date, and the date lined up with the week Nora Vance had driven into Bracken County with $41. She did not give them anything about the first 2 women, and the investigators believed her when she said she did not know what had happened to them. And that belief was somehow the most disturbing part of the entire file. Boone called Elias Ward the day the plea was entered. He said Nora would probably want to know that Pryor had never once in 19 years met a single witness in person. He said the woman had sold 3 human beings she could not have picked out of a room. Elias did not pass that along because there was nothing in it that made anything better. Nora testified on a Wednesday in a federal courthouse in Knoxville. There were 2 protection agents in the hallway and 1 at the elevator bank, and a new case coordinator who had been vetted at a level that produced a paper file 3 inches thick. And there was Ray Duvall in the 3rd row of the gallery in a suit that did not fit him anymore. And Nora looked at him once before she sat down and did not need to look again. She testified for 4 hours and 40 minutes. She did it in the same voice she used to take an order at Dunn's Mile 9. Level, unhurried, facing the jury the way she faced the Kaminskys, saying it twice when it needed to be said twice. Rourke's remaining defense attorney came at her credibility twice. The first time he tried the standard route, which was the 14 months, the motels, the cash, the fact that she had not filed a tax return in over a year. He wanted her rattled. He wanted a jury looking at a woman who lived out of a duffel bag. She agreed with every fact he put to her. She said yes to all of it plainly without defending any of it. And then she said that she had lived that way because 2 other women in her case had stopped living anyway at all, and the attorney had to physically stop and rebuild his next question, and the jury watched him do it. The second attempt was worse for him. He went after her memory. He put a date to her and suggested she had it wrong. And Nora Vance corrected him on the date, and then corrected him on the day of the week, and then told him what time the meeting had started, and what time it had ended, and who had left first, and which door they had used. Her account was not emotional. It was architectural. Detail on detail in sequence without one single hesitation. And the reason for that was something the jury would never know. which was that this woman had spent 14 months training herself to hold every fact of her life in her head at all times because she had never once been able to write any of it down. The attorney sat down. Emmett Rourke was convicted on all counts. Nora was not in the room for the verdict. She was in a witness suite 2 floors up when Duvall came in and told her, and she did not cry and she did not celebrate. She asked him to repeat it. He repeated it. She nodded once and asked what time it was, and when he told her it was 3:20, she said the dinner shift started at 4 and she was not going to make it back. And Ray Duvall laughed for the first time in 7 months. Silas Krebs, the man with the neck tattoo, took a cooperation deal 3 weeks after Rourke went down. Nobody expected much from him. He was a driver and a watcher, and he had never been in a room where decisions were made. What he had, it turned out, was a memory for roots. I gave up 11 addresses across 2 states, 4 of which had never appeared in any federal file, and inside of 5 months, that testimony had opened 3 new investigations and turned what everyone had understood to be a single trafficking operation into something considerably larger and considerably older. 2 of those addresses produced people who were still alive. That was the sentence Boone used when he called, and he said it plainly and did not decorate it, and Elias Ward sat in his truck outside a base in North Carolina and did not say anything for a while. Wade Turner pled guilty to 2 counts of criminal conspiracy and 1 count of assault, and the federal connection elevated his county charges past the point where Bracken County's compromised supervision structure could shave anything off them. He got 4 years federal. His attorney argued at sentencing that his client's conduct in the diner had been crude but not violent in any meaningful sense. The prosecutor responded by entering into the record a canvas hood, a roll of duct tape, and a set of flex cuffs recovered from a man Turner had personally supplied to a federal fugitive. The judge gave him the top of the range. Cass Whitlow's supervisor retired in September under conditions the department described as voluntary and that not one person in the building believed were voluntary. He was not charged. The federal file on him closed with a referral to the state. And the state did what states do with referrals, and Whitlow made her peace with that in the way people in her line of work learn to make peace with things, except that she did not entirely. She got promoted to senior deputy in October, and the promotion came with a direct line to a state prosecutor who took her calls on the first ring, and the first thing Cass Whitlow did with that line was reopen 4 complaints from 3 years back that had arrived on a certain desk with material facts missing. 2 of them went somewhere. She told Hollis Dunn about it over coffee at his counter on a Tuesday, and Hollis listened, and when she was done, he told her he had spent 30 years believing that certain things in that county were simply fixed in place, the way weather is fixed in place, and that he had been wrong about that his entire adult life, and it had taken a rookie waitress 6 days to prove it. Hollis stopped paying the catering account in March. Nobody came. No windows went out. No truck sat in his lot at closing. He put the money into a new back door with a real deadbolt and a coat of paint on the front of the building and a coffee machine that did not have to be started 40 minutes early to be ready by 7. He also gave Nora a raise, which he described to her as a cost of living adjustment, and which was in the actual accounting of it a completely different kind of entry. He fixed the floorboard by booth 4 in April. Nora stepped over it anyway for 2 more weeks before her feet caught up. Ray Duvall was reinstated to his full position in November. The review board that had removed him 7 months earlier issued a finding that described the original administrative action as procedurally sound based on the information available at the time, which was the closest thing to an apology that any institution was going to produce, and Duvall read it once and put it in a drawer. His first case back was Nora Vance's post-trial transition file. He requested it specifically. Nobody objected because, objecting to Ray Duvall, after he had assembled a federal conspiracy case from a desk in Virginia, using nothing but personal favors and a delayed delivery date, was not a thing anyone in that building was prepared to do twice. He called her every other Thursday for a year. He never once asked how she was doing in the way people ask when they want to be told fine. He asked what her hours were. He asked whether she had noticed the same vehicle twice. He asked whether she was still sitting facing the door. For a long time, the answer to that last one was yes. Elias Ward reported back on the Monday exactly as scheduled, 48 hours after he told a woman in an apron that he had 2 days. He completed his next deployment in 7 months and 2 weeks, which was 3 weeks ahead of the projected timeline. His commanding officer wrote it up as operational efficiency. Elias knew what it actually was, which was a man moving faster because he had somewhere specific to be when it was finished. He drove back into Bracken County on a Tuesday in March. He took the long route through the county, the one that added 20 minutes, and it was entirely deliberate, and Kodiak sat up in the back seat about 4 miles out and did not lie back down. Nora was working the morning shift. She set his coffee in front of him before he asked for it. Black, no sugar. She had not forgotten, and she had not looked at the schedule to check whether she would be on when he came, and both of those things were lies. She had been telling herself for a couple of weeks and had stopped bothering with about 4 days ago. She said he was 3 weeks early. He said the operation wrapped ahead of schedule. She asked how it was, and he said long and wrapped both hands around the mug the way he had done the first night and asked how it had been here. She looked around her own diner for a second before she answered. The regulars in their booths, Hollis's voice coming through the pass-through complaining about a delivery, a whole room of people who knew her name and had known it for 8 months. She said quiet, then she said good quiet. Elias asked her something then that he had been carrying since a parking lot in the cold. You are not measuring the distance to the exit anymore. Nora stopped with her hand on the pot. She had not noticed. That was the thing. She turned it over the last hour, the last week, the last 3 months, looking for the reflex, and it was not there, and she could not say when it had left. She said no. She said, I'm not. And she said it with a kind of wonder in her voice that had no performance in it at all. Kodiak had pressed himself against her leg under the counter before Elias had fully settled onto the stool. She reached down without looking and put her hand flat on his back, and the dog leaned into it with his entire weight. The complete, uncomplicated contentment of an animal who had been in this building before, had made an assessment about it, and had never once revised the assessment. Hollis Dunn appeared in the pass-through window. He looked at Elias. He looked at Nora. He looked at the two of them at the same counter where all of it had started. And he said absolutely nothing and went back to his grill, which from Hollis Dunn was its own particular form of welcome. Elias sat there and thought about the stool he was on. 8 months earlier, a man in a green and brown uniform had put himself on that exact seat because he needed coffee and a place to exist that required nothing from him, and had instead walked into the middle of the worst night of a stranger's life and had not been able to stop thinking about it since, through 2 continents in 1 deployment. Some men leave because leaving is the only thing they have ever done. Some men stay because the situation requires staying. And some men drive 2 hours out of their way on a Tuesday morning in March for coffee that is honestly not very good, and none of the rest of it matters at all. Nora poured a second mug and set it on the counter beside his. Not for a customer. She set it down on her side of the counter, and then she stayed standing behind it, and she had never once done that in 8 months of working that room. Elias looked at the mug, then at her. She said eggs. He said Hollis's were still the best in the state. She told him not to let the man hear that because he would never stop. And Elias Ward said that was fine because he planned on being around long enough to hear it. Nora Vance looked at him. Not the careful look. Not the one that counted exits in measured strangers and calculated how much a person had just given away. The other one. The unguarded, whole, steady look of a woman who had run for 14 months and had stopped running and had stood her ground in a kitchen at 4 in the morning and had walked into a federal courtroom and told the truth in a voice that never once shook. The look of a woman standing exactly where she had chosen to stand. She said, good. Under the counter, Kodiak's tail swept once across the floor, slow and satisfied, the final word from the one who had decided everything first, on a night when 20 people sat still, and 1 dog crossed a floor of broken glass because he had made up his mind about who needed him. 20 people heard Wade Turner say, take it off. 20 people went silent, and every one of them had a reason, and the reasons were all real. A mortgage, a family, a county where one man's reach went further than the law did. Fear is not a character flaw. Fear is just information about what a person believes it will cost them to move. But somewhere in every room like that one, there is a person who moves anyway. Hollis Dunn spent 14 months buying quiet and then picked up a cast iron skillet at 4 in the morning. Cass Whitlow filed 6 months of reports into a desk that ate every one of them and filed the 7th. Ray Duvall lost his career, his access, and his badge, and built the case anyway from a desk in Virginia with nothing but 8 days and a delayed delivery date. Elias Ward stopped for a cup of coffee he did not need and stood up when nobody else would. And Nora Vance, who had every reason on this earth to keep her head down, said don't. The difference between the people who move and the people who do not is never the circumstance. It is never the odds. It is character. And character is the one thing on this earth that cannot be taken from a person who refuses to hand it over.